Do we know if there are some people still having a little coffee break, or no? It's all good? Yeah? Okay. So, welcome to this last part of today's program, which is a transnational assembly on feminist solidarity, organized by European Alternatives in the context, of course, of the Citizens Summit of EU-Mens. So I'm very happy that we're doing this assembly today at the European Solidarity Center Solidarity, apologies, in Gdansk in Poland. My name is Ophélie Masson, and I will be co-facilitating this assembly with Sofia Ingrid Viviani by my side. I'm the program coordinator of European Alternatives. I'm also a queer activist, co-chair, board member of IGLIO, Youth LGBT+ organization. And I'm very happy to be welcoming you here for this assembly. So just to give you a bit of a context, European Alternatives has been organizing more than, I'll say, 30 citizen assemblies in the past 2 years. So this is something that we are mastering, I think, at a certain point from a methodological point of view. And the reason why we are organizing citizen assemblies is to propose an alternative to representative democracy as we know it. It's no secret that current representative democracy is going through a crisis of trust. We are not here to necessarily analyze the whys, but more to propose other ways and other solutions. Some of those other solutions can be European citizen initiatives, like the ones that we've been talking about earlier today. Another way to promote participative democracy is also through citizen assemblies. Some of you might have heard extensively about the Conference on the Future of Europe, which we have closely monitored with European Alternatives and with Citizens Take Over Europe. And through these initiatives, we are not only monitoring how citizen assemblies have been run at European level, but we also want to propose our own process of citizen assemblies and experimenting with this format of participative and deliberative democracy. So today's assembly is focusing on feminist solidarity. And I think it's, of course, especially important that we talk about feminism in Poland. Of course, access to reproductive health and rights in Poland is a big topic, a big issue when we include abortion rights. But it's not the one and only feminism battle that Polish women and Polish feminists are fighting for today. And so that's why also we're going to be expanding our horizons also when we talk about feminism in Poland and in Eastern Europe. This is an especially critical moment to talk about that because we're at a turning point from a political perspective. 2023 is the year of parliamentary elections in Poland. At the end of the year, people will vote for their new parliament. And of course, we have the next EU elections in the spring of 2024. In that sense, that's why we're going to focus specifically on feminism from a local perspective in Gdansk and the Gdansk region, national perspective, and an EU perspective. I'll give the mic to my dear co-facilitator, who will introduce a brand different issue to us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ophélie. Yeah, I'm Sophie. I think I've met already most of you. Of course, I'm a feminist, but that's not my area of studies. I'm a federalist. As an activist, I'm part of the European Federalist Movement. To be honest, I'm really honored to be here because the speakers we're going to hear after, they're kind of heroes of ours, I'd say. So I'm really, really honored. When I was talking to Philippe before this session about what is that I really want to bring to this session? What is my take on this session? Of course, my education is pretty focused on federalism. I think you all have guessed it by now that I'm kind of obsessed with it. But this quote from Antonio Gramsci came to my mind, so I wanted to share it with you to get a little intro on what we're talking about. So Gramsci wrote in 1926, the old world is dying away, and the new world struggles to come forth. Now is the time of monsters. I think most of you already know this quote is a really famous quote, but I think it applies really well both to my area of study, which is federalism, but especially on feminism. And I think these two battles really comes along. They kind of influence each other, and that's the value that feminists can give to any battle, to any issue. Having feminist lenses in every debate makes the whole difference, and I think that's pretty much what we're trying to do here. I think that especially when we talk about transnational politics, that's really feminism plays a big role. If there is something that the recent feminist movements in Poland, but in the rest of Europe has shown so far, and succeed in it, is this been bringing about the concept of the common through their collective action. And they build communities. They were already there, but they gathered. And these communities really highlighted the importance of shared public spaces. And these shared public spaces are squares, protests, but also public welfare systems, really giving the message that the feminist identity, which I consider to be identity, can be applied to everything, and it has to be applied to everything. So I'm just going to leave the floor to our amazing speakers, and I hope you from the public, but also in the working groups later on, we can share our experiences, we can try to influence each other in that sense. So I think we can start with our three panelists. Ophélie, you want to go ahead presenting the first one?
So there's been a slight change of plan because apparently COVID still exists. So we actually have two speakers today. Yeah, just a quick word before we go into that. I just want to explain a bit how this is going to go. So we're going to listen to our two guest speakers, keynote speakers, first on the current main issues that they identify for feminist movements right now in Poland and at EU level. Then we're going to have a moment when you can also share about your experiences and your ideas and struggles that you feel connect with the speeches that you will have just heard. We'll have a little break, and then we will have a second round with our dear speakers, where they will present to us what are their ideas and solutions to combat those said struggles. And then we will go into a more collaborative discussion when you will be the ones fully participating and bringing your perspective into smaller group discussions with topics that we have predefined for you. Then we will all come back together to hear what are those ideas, and then we will be set free for dinner time. I'm very happy to introduce to you our first speaker, Litka Makowska, with the movement that she will give the name of in Polish, because I don't want to take the risk. Let's call it TAK to make it simple, T-A-K. So thank you, Litka.
Hi. Okay. So I just need this small table to prepare myself. Okay. Those exactly, they works as well. So let us start. Just a second. Okay. Yeah, I would prefer to stand. And again, hi, my name is Litka Makowska. I'm here from Gdansk, locally. Professionally, I am a cultural manager and a trainer in human rights and intercultural dialogue. I was very curious to come here, to meet you, people from Europe. They came here to Gdansk for the Transnational Assembly of Feminist Solidarity. Feminist Solidarity. So I guessed you, just like me, are interested in intersectional feminism. And I will explain what I mean about this. I'm very, very happy that I first can ask you a question. Now the question, do you know these famous words of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world? How many of you know this? Raise the hand. Almost everybody. Oh, I see almost everybody. And now the second question. How many of you think here and now, really and sincerely, that you are the change you want to see in the world? How many of you? Or I would say a half of the group. Thank you. Okay, so I am in the group who thinks, yes, I am the change. I make the change, and this is very important to me as a feminist. 20 years ago, some of you maybe were born there, I heard those words of Gandhi at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, where I was studying. And those words were very transforming to me. After coming back from my abroad study to Gdansk, I decided to look around in civic movements in Poland, here locally in Gdansk. It was like 20 years ago. And 20 years ago in Poland, we still were at the moment where our country were in the transformation from the communistic country under the Soviet Union oppression to the one now of the 28 European Union countries. I do remember very good this transformation time. And I was thinking 20 years ago, this is my time. I am the change I want to see in the world. And it was the really motivation for me, this 20 years ago, to act as I am acting today, as an intersectional feminist. And yeah, I do it. I did it. And of course, it was not from the very beginning that I was very active and engaged. First, I was observing many civic movements in Gdansk, here in Poland, and I really decided, yes, the movement for me is feminism. Feminism that has place for both men in their privileged position, because men in public sphere are in power, have been constantly in power, and still in the patriarchy in Poland are in power, and women that had to wait for many decades and even ages to study at the universities, to have the women's rights in the elections 100 years ago, to be a Nobel Prize winner like our Polish Nobel Prize winner Maria Skłodowska-Curie. And this is the feminist that I really believe in. And 20 years ago, I decided with some friends to establish an organization, an initiative which is called Trójmiejska Akcja Kobieca, in English, Women's Action in Gdansk region. And we've been acting until now. First, we started with our flagship action, our manifestation, Manifa. And now I would like to show you. This is our poster from the year 2005. So there are some several figures, women, strong women without heads. And this is the invitation, come to manifestation on 8th of March, kill patriarchy. So 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, we were like those women without heads, which means without our voice. I do remember this time. We really was thinking that we are on a very, very margin positions. Now, not only me being a veteran activist, but also young women in Poland are now on this position. This is the poster of our this year manifestation, Manifa, the 19th manifestation on 8th of March, and this is totally different. Difference is because 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, because it is 19th Manifa, we were thinking we first have to struggle for women's rights, for rights to the abortion, for rights for women, for many, many social things. Now, after 19 years, we know now is our time for intersectional feminism. And how it is now, how you can see this. It is our 19th Manifa, and it is very important to us to stress it is our her story already. Her story, which means we, women movement, feminist movement in Poland, we have our history, her story. And we will never, ever allow to erase her story from the Polish history. This is very important, this her story. And then, exactly, and thank you for this ovation, because it is also very important for young women. They already understand that we are making her story now. And what is important also in this poster, it is a person, non-binary person, probably of migrant origin, with maybe a trans woman, with the symbols of LGBT plus colors, rainbow, but rainbow of non-binary movement. And this is everything very important. It's important that we have changed our narrative from being women movement to being intersectional feminist movement. This is our change. We are the change we want to see in the world. This year, on the 8th of March, in Gdansk, so 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, many young women and persons, non-binary persons as well, were talking about different important things, like racism, like poverty, like climate change, everything which is now politically important. Also about lack of flats for young people, about problems for young women to come back after the maternity to the work, etc. And we really think that feminism must be intersectional now. Intersectional feminist means including all the discriminated groups, like gender, sex, age, disability, ethnic origin, LGBT+, religion, non-religion, poverty, social exclusion, everything. And feminism is also a fight against climate change and solidarity with animals and all living beings. Why? Why feminists, women, and non-binary people are demanding for this? Why do we have the rights? Because as we think about women, this very often we think about taking care. We women take care. Take care about climate, take care about the future generations, our children, our grandchildren. Therefore, we are thinking about climate change. And this is the feminism I believe in. Some of you might say, ooh, it's too much. You should concentrate on one priority. One civic movement, one priority. And for me, with my experience of 20 years of activism, I would say no. It is not true anymore. We don't have any success with this kind of thinking. Now is the time that we should unite. All civic movements should unite, especially here in Poland. Because only if we unite different disciplines, we can win. And then we can be the change. It is very, very important now in the present situation in Poland. As you have heard yesterday and today, we are now in Poland like in the USA, like USA was under the Donald Trump oppression. We are in the same position, but maybe worse because we have very strong religious fundamentalists in the power and very dangerous government. They're like Vladimir Putin in Russia, they also want a war. Therefore, we are very scared. And I'm deeply convinced that we should spread and develop in Poland all means now, all means before the nearest election to put together towards the intersectional feminism. This is now time for women, for intersectional feminism. And it is also very important here in Gdansk, in whole Poland, but also in the whole European Union. This is what we can call here from Gdansk, from the city of solidarity. United we stand, divided we fall. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Such powerful words. I'm sure in the working groups we're having after this session, we can discuss a little bit more about international feminism.
I invite you to the questions.
Yes, of course. In such a small amount of time, you're really clear in the message. So I think you gave us really some elements to think about and to discuss. Thank you again for being here. So we are going to give the floor to our second speaker. We have Marta Lempart. She already gave her speech yesterday. She's the founder of the All Poland Women's Strike. She's a fierce feminist. She also advocates for LGBT plus rights and rights of the people with disabilities. So I think it really connects with intersectional feminism as well. So I'll give you the floor, Marta. I hope you can hear me. I hope we can hear you.
Cześć Marto, daję ci odwagę.
Kochana, tak się cieszę, że cię widzę.
I gave Marta some hello.
I really want to
It will be hard to speak after Elitka because she basically said all. Hello, I'm sorry I cannot be there. I have like renewed spine injury and it's just impossible to travel. So yeah, I'm just online. And I was asked to speak about the state of the struggle, of the feminist struggle in Poland. And of course, the first thought that comes to mind is abortion rights, is reproductive rights, is women's rights in general, violence. And then we have the second stage of realizing that it's about everything, basically. And that Poland is this example of the fight that is about everything and the fight that is led by women. And we have this huge success in this fight, that how we get the hope from. It's the abortion, the perception of abortion and support for legal abortion in Poland. The social support for legal abortion in Poland is now 70%. In 2016, when the Polish women's strike was starting as a coalition of local leaders, organizers, organization, it was 37%. So that's the change. That's what was caused by the attempts to ban abortion in Poland, actually. So we now have 70% support. And what's important and what's significant is that it's the support that is so high that it actually caused already a political change on the opposition side. No, of course, not on the government side, although they are also, the voters of the government are also in favor of legal abortion by 31%, but on the so-called democratic side. And of course, we have to take it with a grain of salt, but still, before 2016, we had this whole political scene, all the politicians that were conservative, and that would always vote no to legal abortion, no matter what party they were at. The high level of support, of social support for legal abortion also is visible among the voters of the opposition. So voters of the opposition side support legal abortion by 90%. 97% of civic platform voters, so the right-wing conservative party, Christian party, are for legal abortion. 94% of Polska 2050, which is a Christian fundamentalist party, are also in favor of legal abortion. 78% of the agricultural party voters also are in favor of legal abortion. And of course, so we are in the middle of the struggle to make this not only social change, but also the political change. And in some cases, it already happened. In some cases, the leaders of the parties are still ignoring what their voters want. I mean, Polska 2050 and the Agricultural Party, they basically don't care what the voters want, and they say it openly that they don't care. They are following the church, they are following the right wing, they are not following their voters. So when in this really interesting position before the coming elections, when abortion is this key issue, like it was in the midterms in the United States, in the elections, that it will be one of the elements of the electoral campaign. And we are actually responsible to keep it as the second issue in the electoral campaign, and to make sure that it's not just declarations by the parties, but it's also declarations, obligations by all the candidates, all the politicians. So now this is the status for now, at least when it comes to abortion rights. Donald Tusk, who's a leader of the Christian Conservative Party, declared that they will legalize abortion in 6 months after the elections. We'll see, because we've heard many declarations from many politicians already, but it hasn't happened yet. As well as the declaration that no person will be allowed actually to run from these party lists if they don't support legal abortion. So this is this beginning of the political change, not only the social change, but also the political change. And what does it mean? What does it mean that the Conservative Christian Party changed their stance officially from supporting the ban on abortion to supporting legalization, at least officially? It means that we are scarier than the church, that we are more terrifying than bishops, that they are more afraid, because it's, of course, it's not like the reason started working or respect started working, it's the political calculation. People on the streets, people who protest, people who demand their rights are scarier for most of our political scene than the church. That's the win. This is also the win. Because when we talk about the struggle, we're talking about the struggle that comes to very significant point, making Poland a state that's secular. Whatever happens to human rights in Poland, whatever we see happening, whatever we can expect, it will always be a struggle between a state that is not secular, as we have now. We have some religious rights and some religious books, sayings and declarations and obligations implemented in the law, in the state law, which is ridiculous. And the state that is secular. So it's not based on any religion. It's not used to force religious beliefs on people. The best example in Poland, I think, is the religious clause for the doctors, which means that if a doctor has some imaginary entities in his mind, believes that some person sometime long ago walked on the water, he doesn't have to perform the work that he is hired to do and paid to do. So his imagination, his personal whatever it is over the patient's rights. That's the law that we have in Poland. This is legal for the doctors to say that, yeah, I'm not doing my work, I don't feel like it anymore because, you know, I'm religious, so I don't care about your rights and about that you're a patient, actually. So this is the struggle that we're looking at. This is the struggle of the change, transforming from social change to political change, and then to legal change. And it's all on the issues, all the human rights issues, all the women's rights issues, LGBT rights issues, and so on and so on. And the outcome will be stable and the outcome will be real if Poland finally becomes a secular state. If Poland doesn't have any religious, whatever it is, these elements, crazy things that we still have in the state law, and they are forced by the state law. So this is for me, that's the state of the struggle. That's what we are looking at, that's what we're fighting with. And of course, we have to expect everything. We can expect the government to win the elections. We can expect the government to lose the elections. But the thing that we see is that support for progressive postulates is stable. It's not like it happened just because of the protests or just because of the signature collection, just once in one poll. It's been like that for years already. And it's just there to stay. And I think politicians realize that it's happening like that. So, yeah, I always say, people ask me why, if I'm full of, how can I be so full of hope? It's not the hope. It's not that I hope, I know. We're looking at the change that is already happening. It has its stages, and it's inevitable. And I think that presenting the struggle that we have in Poland as the defensive fight, of course, we are reacting to what's happening. We are reacting. We were trying to stop the ban on abortion for a long time. But we are actually the ones who are leading the fight. And the church, the right wing, the neo-Nazis, the conservatives are the ones who are defending themselves. And they are just trying to delay what's happening, and they are trying to delay what's going to come. That's how I see that. And that's why I'm so hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. We can see that you're always on the move, but we would really appreciate if you can bear with us a little bit so we can have some questions from the public here, and maybe you can share our thoughts on the discussion. So now we're having a first round of kind of Q&A. What's your thoughts about what's been said? If you have questions to our speakers, we want to be this process as participated as possible. I know the setting is quite separated here, but we want the people to be involved in this discussion. So please raise your hand. Yes, Klaus, of course.
Thank you very much. I find your speech very, very nice and very, very important. And I only want to give you a short point. Unconditional basic income empowerment of women. This was decided 1st of March. UBI is one of the important tools to reach gender equality. It ensures every woman's material independence from the her husband or partner empowers and enables her to live and act in a self-determined and more equal way. Besides the UBI, equal pay for equal work for all genders in gainful employment must be achieved. So that is a short statement, I think, fitting here to this discussion. Thank you.
Maybe we can collect a few questions and then, yeah, you can take.
Or maybe questions, reflections like yours.
Yes, whatever you want. Opinions, feelings, whatever you want.
Hi, I'm Magdalena Muszel. Thank you, Litka, for your speech, very inspiring speech. And I definitely agree with this intersectionality approach of feminist movement. But what is, I think, in my opinion, very important is transnational approach of feminist movement. I think that this transnational approach would very much strengthen the movement. Like we can so much to learn from each other, because not only in Poland we have problems, but as we can observe, unfortunately, in other countries as well. So there is a lot of things to work on together and also learn from each other. So this is my dream for the future, to build a transnational cooperation, transnational alliances of feminists, like local, national feminist movements.
Thank you very much, Magda. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Litka, and thanks, Magda, for this remark, because I think this occasion when we're here is exactly this, but on the one hand, I think you're mentioning this, from learning also from other places, from the perspective of Polish feminists, but I think it's also an occasion for all the people who came here from other countries, because I think this is, Polish feminists have inspired a lot of people across the world and across the globe. So we are already here in the process of co-learning somehow, which I think is sometimes, in Poland there is this tendency to underestimate its value. And I think, as you said, the Polish her story cannot be erased from the Polish history. I think perhaps one of the most important values in Poland is its feminism, what we can learn from all across Europe and perhaps across the globe. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
But may I ask one question to you, Litka? What do you think is, because Marta was speaking also about the national elections, but also, there is the European elections. What do you think is how can others across Europe support, the work you do? Or, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we'll do a second round, so please remember your question, and then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, to me, it is very important, this European, transnational impact. But I see this in two fields, two levels. Because if we talk about feminism in terms of intersectional feminism, including, for example, problems of racism, climate change, this is different. So I feel really European in those topics. But on the other hand, if we talk about rights to abortion, so we are the only country in the European Union with this conservative law, and with problems that women and men together could not decide themselves about their parenthood. It's not probably, it is absolutely bizarre. So therefore I always feel very ashamed with my now Polish origin, being somewhere in this European society, okay, but we are from this far-right politicians, fundamentalists in power, so we are like, you know, in a worse position. But the third dimension to me is very much, and I see this as a veteran feminist, it is very, very important for young people, young women, to exchange their ideas, reflections, inspirations. It is always to me, this kind of meetings, they are like a charging battery for me. I'm very, very happy that I could meet you today, that we are talking now, and you know, this is like really very important thing, which is which really change our also not only us, but also our political positions. But if I act, because I act locally, and I go to the countryside here in the Pomeranian region, and I talk to the people there, unfortunately, I feel like with my European dimension, a little bit like really, we are like not really on the ground. And this is not by accident that we still in Poland have almost 35% of people, they don't want to be in the European Union. They vote for this far-right parties, and this is a lot of people, 35% of Polish people. So we are really now in a position like the European Union dimension is for me a kind of it is a real great thing. But on the other side, I see the Polish society, which is really stuck on these conservative values.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just one quick thing. I think what you said is really interesting about this double dimension, being European, but at the same time, sometimes don't feel real European. I guess we have two ways of seeing this. Being transnational in the fights we carry and everything doesn't necessarily mean being European. Transnational is way beyond the European borders. It's being transnational in the sense that I choose my identities, and I don't let a state or an institution to tell me that I'm just one thing. So I don't let the Italian state to tell me that I'm just Italian, and I don't let the European Union to tell me that I'm just European. But when I say I'm a woman, that's the real transnational aspect of my identity, because women are in every state. I hope so. But we can all help each other out. And of course, the situations are really different, like if you compare Poland to other countries, of course. But there are so many points of contact, and even beyond the European borders. So this transnational aspect is the real core of sisterhood in that sense, helping each other now. But yeah, I don't want to steal time here. We have two questions, one there and then Marco.
Thank you. My name is Remy. And I have a very simple question, a little bit theoretizing. Like, women's strike, I think it passed his teenage years at this moment, youngsters, it's growing up movement. And how are your preparations for the upcoming elections, taking account so many uncertainties? We don't know even if there will be like central party ruling, far-right party ruling in the government, or maybe we have coalition on certain left. Is women's strike on the local level preparing for upcoming European and national elections and municipality elections? So any answers would be quite nice.
Thank you. I think we have Marco down here. Thank you very much for helping out with the mic.
Thank you very much. I think it is important also to combine the definition and the political goals in a way. I like very much feminism as as a definition and as an identity also.
Sì, hanno guardato per le scarpe.
Okay, I'm not sure this is another hacker, because today we're getting used to it. Or if it's Marta, okay. Maybe you have your mic on.
My question is about those issues in which feminism is not enough then to decide. Well, I make the example, it's very concrete. There are two examples in which, as far as I know, at least in Italy, the feminist camp is divided. And you have prostitution and you have surrogacy. You can have feminist movement in favor of legalization and feminist movement, or at least feminist ideas, totally opposing this. And this is also true for surrogacy. So I think that feminism is a very important word, term, and with a strong identity, but there are some issues where it is not enough by itself to go to a consequence on which proposal you support. I don't know what you think about. And a comment on what you said as Poland as the only, well, it's true, Malta also has a very strict legislation on that. But I think that the European dimension can be useful in a positive sense. The European Parliament and even President Macron, when he was president of the European Council, they were talking about abortion as a fundamental human right. So, and in this case, the European dimension would be relevant not simply to look at what is happening at national level, but in a way to guaranteeing a fundamental human rights wherever in Europe. Also for those countries that maybe today they have a legal possibility, but we know that freedom and civil rights cannot be taken for granted for the future. There can also be countries where we do some step back, maybe in the coming years. So this is why it is so important, the transnational dimension, even for those countries that currently they are not in a situation of prohibition of abortion. Thanks.
Okay, so many questions. So I will go for your answer, and then we have two other questions there, but maybe we could just like, if you can answer that first.
I could comment, because first I would comment on your reflection and questions, and then afterwards to yours. First of all, I could comment your first question about this problems of definitions of feminism and values of feminism in those topics like surrogates or sex workers. And I could say only on myself that I think that the feminism today means everybody has the power to speak on yourselves. It means that if women, they decide to be surrogate, they have their rights. And if women decide voluntary or very conscious, and this is consent, to do this work like sex work, they have rights to take this decision. So this is my opinion on feminism. And the second question about, our second issue about this transnational, trans-European impact by topics like abortion here in Poland, yeah, it is very important. Yes, you are right, you're right. It's very important because even if the let's say, narrative in the public, for example, in the national television, which is unfortunately seen by very many people in Poland. Therefore, this 35% of voters of far-right politicians, in this television, they say the European Union has no rights to decide about Polish women. Of course, we know it is not true. And hopefully, young generation know, okay, if there will be a law of the European level, it will come also to Poland as the law, as the right. And this is very important. And the first question, to be honest, I do not understand really what was the question, because it was kind of an echo here. Do you remember this question?
Maybe if you could repeat the question, and in the meantime...
Because...
no meantime then.
I didn't hear this correctly.
Very briefly, how women's strike regionally is preparing for the upcoming elections, or are you planning any actions? Thank you.
Maybe Marta can respond to that. So how is the women's strike preparing for the
women's
elections?
strike, how is preparing? Okay, if Marta is with us, then probably she would better answer. I can tell you again on my own position from our organization here locally in Gdańsk, Trójmiejska Akcja Kobieca. We are very much prepared. We've been waiting for this for 4 years, and now we are prepared with a number of questions which are already prepared to all these politicians about the human rights, rights rights for feminist movement, and about all those important things that I was mentioned in my speech. So we have the power now, and we are prepared to start, as they will be officially started, the election campaign, to come to each single politician here from Gdańsk region to ask personally, in person, what do you think about this and this and this and this? And this is our strategy. And of course, this is the one strategy. The other strategy, there are people that we know, women, young women, they are prepared to candidate. And now there is very important in Poland to say to the political parties, hey, veterans in the political parties, please move. Please move. Please make the place for young politicians. As, for example, in Estonia, Lithuania, in those countries, they did it 20 years ago. And in Poland, we still have these politicians. They are now 60 plus, and we really now need a generation change in the politics. And then we would support, here in Gdańsk, we have already decided in our organization, we will support all politicians from opposite party, opposite to the nowadays government. They are going to candidate women who declare themselves as feminists, and men who declare themselves as feminists. So, and not only from one party, from all the opposite parties. So it is not our strategy for the election this year in Poland, but also for the same for the election of the for the European election next year. We are prepared.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to react quickly to Marco's intervention. So I'm taking my hat as a political activist, I guess, now. So, yes, the feminist movement is divided. on certain issues, like surrogacy, like religious freedom, for instance, in certain countries, and the limits of expression of religious freedom and how this can seem to be in conflict with feminism sometimes. And I think it's actually one of those specific cases where we should acknowledge political pluralism and sociological pluralism, and where there is a strong importance of keeping also the conversation at local level. I think this is one of those cases where transnational discussion on those topics, yes, is important to come to a common sense of a common human rights base, but also that we should fully take into consideration those diverse point of views, including on also the topic of prostitution or sex work, depending on the terms that we want to use on that. I think when we bring those topics on certain feminist issues to the transnational level and the European level, there's value in ensuring a common basis of rights. So, for instance, for abortion right, I think it does make sense, but I wouldn't necessarily say that all feminist issues need to be tackled only at European level. So I think this is a nuance that we should bear in mind, because the risk of forcing certain feminist issues to be tackled at solely European level is too big and would actually create a stronger local divide. So to be careful, I think, in that sense. When we talk about abortion rights for all in the EU legal framework, I think this is something that we can definitely push forward. However, we are aware that health is not an EU competency, and so far abortion rights also has been considered as a health capacity, a health competency. And that's the main argument that has been used, of course, like by EU institutions, like it's not our competency. So that's why Poland can kind of get away with it, the Polish government can get away with it so far. So I think for that, it's also a way of how do we want to frame abortion rights. And if we frame this as a fundamental right, then of course this gives us more leverage to ensure that it becomes a fundamental EU right. So I think there's also an importance of the legal perspective we take on abortion rights, and we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later on as well.
Perfect. And also about fundamental rights, again, we need treaty change because, I mean, from legal point of view, the Charter of Fundamental Rights only applies in the scope of EU law. So only when EU institutions, they legislate on some policies, and yeah, it seems like in this perspective that rights are only when EU laws applies. Human rights should be applied in every different level of competence and decision making. So sorry for keep you waiting. We have Virginia first. Then we have another question there, and then Marco Perduca.
Thanks. So I have. No, I thought I deleted the notes. Thanks so much for the speech and also the historical progression, which I think is quite important, both in terms of larger history and also the biographical histories of women. I have 3 points that might be helpful. The first one is, I think, another thing to be associated with feminism is the process of care that you mentioned, but also connection with emotions and self-awareness, which I think is something that the feminist movement can bring to the world somehow. So working on being connected and the power of vulnerability as opposed to a society of performativity. I think it's an element that we think about feminism and how feminists can bring to politics. It's important to take into account. The second element which I offer for reflection is my feeling is that feminist movements are more cooperative and horizontal than other type of movements. I think Ni Una Menos, or whatever is the name in the different context, is a good example where you can't identify the leader of the movement, is more horizontal, and I believe is also based on the principle that if they hit one of us, they hit all of us, and we react all of us. So I think this horizontality and cooperative as opposed to competition is something that, again, can come from feminism, although there are some different approaches. But this, and I think the third aspect is the fight against violence, whether it is gender-based violence, domestic violence, state violence, but I think the fight against patriarchy is then a sort of a mindset that can be transmitted by the feminist movement to everyone in terms of self-awareness, but also in terms of the need of horizontal sisterhood. And in my opinion, in this aspect, one problem is that maybe it's connected to the first point, which is the mental health aspect. So I think as women, what in the trans feminist meaning of women, I think the aspect of internalized patriarchy, but also the impact of different forms of violence, both in our upbringing or in the life experiences, is an aspect that gets underestimated. And I think so we tend to fight against gender-based violence in the emergency and in the moments, but the impact of centuries of violence, patriarchal violence to a certain extent, or ages, years, whatever, biographical histories, but is an important element because we women tend to be educated to apologize, to take a step back, to not take enough space, etc., etc. And I think when we talk about feminist solidarity and also what feminists can bring to the political world is also the care of the mental health, the empowerment, and also the acceptance of vulnerabilities, which lacks in politics because it's built on a scheme of performativity. So just some additional points.
Thank you very much. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, second question there.
I really enjoy the enthusiasm and optimism of Litka, but also Malta. And when we take a closer look at what is happening, especially in Poland in the last years, 2016, over 100,000 people on the streets. And it was the biggest women mobilization in the history of this country. But at the same time, the biggest mobilization since the fall of communism in Poland. And then 2020, huge mobilization, twice or three times bigger than 2016. So, I mean, it's something unbelievably new when we take a closer look at the quality of the protest wave, mobilization ability, small towns, women from the small towns, from small regions, very much dependent on religious beliefs, religious tradition, very conservative surrounding, and so on and so on. And they stand up, it appeared on the street. So that was, I mean, something really new when we take a closer look at what is happening in the country. But we are now 2023, and when we take a look at the, progress or the energy of the mobilization, it slowly disappears because people feel also tired, which you already mentioned a day ago. And when we take a look at the logic of social movements, they appear, then they disappear, but then there's always, when they want to succeed, there's a moment of creating lobby groups, of pressure groups, which change the political situation. So my question, because Malta said she doesn't speak about the hope, but about knowledge, she knows. I would love to hear some knowledge about the situation. Where are we now? What is the answer? Where are we now today with this mobilization? How deeply it can or it changes political culture in Poland. In a society where over 52% of the society are women, right? So where are we now, Litka, Marta?
Thank you very much. So we have one question from Marco Perduca. If you can just pass the mic, thank you very much. And then we go to the speaker's answer.
Thank you. Mine is a personal question, because I couldn't agree more with what you said at the very beginning of your speech, that we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. How much did you have to change to be the change, to change the world? Marco and I grew up in a political party that was the first, I don't know if European political party, but certainly the first Italian party that elected a woman as a Secretary General in 1976. And the first time we elected 4 people, 2 were women and 2 were men, and it was again 1976. So feminism has always been part of our political trajectory, without necessarily using it as a label or as one of the major issues, even if it was the party that legalized divorce and eventually legalized abortion and has always been an LGBTQ plus pro-movement. But at some point something happened, and personally it was living close to a church. Of course, you have a reaction rather than a reflection that makes you change your mind. And I would be interested, I know Marta has strong feelings about the metaphysical stuff, and she has already tried to be as diplomatic as possible in keeping them up to a certain level. But what made you change your mind? Because I understand the explanation you gave, Marco, in the type of feminism that you think is the feminism today is what I'm trying to internalize, which is feminism, anti-prohibitionism, and to a certain extent veganism would be the common denominator of a real revolutionary movement that would involve the minority of people on earth, which are men, as we know, in favor of the biggest victims of human rights violations, not for centuries, but I would say for thousands of years since the history of humankind. I'm talking about taking away my speech. Was more a personal curiosity. Did you have to change to become the change that you want to see happening in the world? And when that happened?
Really good questions. So we're going to have a last round for speaker here, and then we promise we'll have a break. Thank you very much for the questions.
So first to your reflection, I would only add to this, because I agree very much that, you know, what you have mentioned, feminism as the self-confidence, self-care, towards the education, that now we educate already differently daughters and sons, and there is not anymore this pressure that girls must be quiet and nice, and boys are fighters and brave. Hopefully it has changed everywhere, also in Poland, because even the far-right government could not really influence the educational situation in Poland, in families. So I really hope that this self-care, self-confidence, this is very important both for women and men, because men in patriarchy are also suffering. Because very men, I don't know how you in the auditorium, men, you feel, like, you know, being only the brave, fighting, etc., not with emotions, with self-care, with empathy. This division between women and men is totally artificial now, and totally, absolutely not common. Now, Jacek, your question about how is the situation now, the real, let's say, situation how the women strike, and women in Poland, this 52%, are prepared for the change. I agree with you that we are tired. We are exhausted, and I don't see any energy anymore for that kind of big movement like 2 years ago, like all Polish women strike 2 years ago, went to the streets, to big cities, small cities, and even to the countrysides. But what I am optimistic that because we have the parliamentary elections, that women, let's say women that would like to be elected to the Polish parliament, and again, they will be, for example, on the fifth position on the list, on the voting list, and they know already I don't have any chance to be elected because only first, second, and maybe third person from the list will be elected. And if a political woman is on the fifth position, she knows already, okay, it is only to be in the politics, but it is a game. It is not really the situation that I will be elected. And we women in Poland in politics have agreed to this for 30 years of democracy. And I hope now that it will change in that sense that a woman somewhere, for example, in Szczecin, or in Wrocław, or Gdansk, that, okay, the man in my party put me at the fifth position. And she would write something on Facebook, in social media, and other women would say, hey, hello, stop. Stop, we want this woman to be on the third position. Do this. And I hope this will be the energy that we all would have. I don't know if it will be like this, but me personally, I feel this energy. I will do like this. I will do like this. Because it is time now. Yeah, and your question about, how was it?
If you have to change yourself over to get part of this fight, what's your it's more of a personal question, if I'm not mistaken. So if you okay. Me personally, I have changed about like 100%, because as I started, I started like this, fighting, kill, patriarchy. And now I see that there are different other fields, partnerships, very, very diverse world. So I have changed very much. And I also see, even by young feminists, they also are open for this kind of changes, because we've been living now in this, let's say, very much unstable world. We have the war in Ukraine, and it influences us. We have this climate change, and we don't know in 20 years if Gdansk won't be under the Baltic Sea. We don't know about this. And in a sense, we don't have this stability like my parent had 20 years ago. And my daughter, 15 years old, she won't be, she knows anything. And this is this change.
Thank you. So we are now going to go in a little break so we can recharge. So very quick break, 5 minutes. We just come back here quickly, and then we go into our more collaborative part, but we will also get another chance of interacting with our speakers. So see you in 5.
Amazing speech. Thank you very much for being here. That was
deepen feminist movements and women's rights. So Marta, you're up. I think you're muted, Marta. We can't hear you. We see you, but we can't hear you.
Okay, but I cannot do anything about it because I'm not muted, so. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
So, when we talk about the European elections, I come with this very strong warning and the reflection on what's happening, has been happening for not only last year, but last couple of years. The base for that is the fact that we here have this really particular situation, as most of civic organizations in Poland, most of human rights organizations, women's rights organizations, pro-democratic organizations also, apart from doing their core work, are also doing the response to the Russian war in Ukraine. So sometimes it's even half by half, the work that we do. The core work that we used to do before the big war started and the response to the war. And we're experiencing that every day. And this is the perception that we will have when the time for the elections will come. And ignoring that fact that we have experienced this division between West and the East on this occasion, that this is the time when we realize that there is no equality, there is still Western, Eastern part of the European community, that our voice counts by half, that we're less. Us, Lithuanians, Latvians, Slovakians, and also Ukrainians, if that's not taken into account by civic organizations, the Western civic organizations, European organizations, if that's not taken into account by European community in general, I don't think we will have the common platform to fight in the European elections. Because my perception, my general agenda for the European election is that I will handle my fight here if needed. I will handle abortion fight, I will handle women's rights fight, I will handle human rights fight, and so on and so on. The only thing that is interesting for me when I think of people who will be candidates in European elections is what's their stance on Ukraine joining the European Union? What's their stance on the war reparation? What's their plan, their deadlines, and what's their idea how to work with the Ukrainian government also so they don't get the free pass on human rights issues as the Polish government did when we were doing that session. And we ended up when we ended up, we're here. So that's the thing. And I've been speaking about it for some time, but unfortunately, still, it's the voice that is being ignored. We are perceived as hysterical, we are perceived as that we're too emotional about what's happening. Yes, we're very emotional. I wake up every day in Warsaw alive because probably some Ukrainian soldier died that night. And this is the common experience of us all here. And we were supposed to be the generation that was not that afraid, that was not supposed to experience that. And that's the common experience of people in the Baltics, people in the eastern side of Europe. And we see that this voice is not being heard. So my task and my challenge for human rights organizations, feminist organizations, civic organizations in Europe, but also the European community, is to finally acknowledge that we've been treated as half citizens, our voice was half, and it's the last moment to make it up. It's the last moment to repair it, to fix that. And these elections will be the test of how this voice is perceived and how this voice is being treated. Because that's the only question I will be asking. And many of the people who are engaged now within their civic organizations in their war response, this is the question we will be asking. How will you treat Ukraine? What's your plan? How long will that take? And how will you treat them? And how the accession will look like, especially when it comes to human rights and so on. So that's the thing for me. The rest of the things, as I say, if needed, we will manage locally. This is the one thing that I demand European community, European organizations to acknowledge and to react to that and to admit that we've been treated really badly
and our voices were not heard. And because we were saying it would happen, and we were saying that we're afraid, and we were speaking about it for years. And it's happening in our very eyes. So I think that's the last moment, and this upcoming elections will be the test. If this voice is being ignored, if the Latvian, Lithuanian, Polish voice is ignored on that, you will have, and we will have the lowest turnout European elections ever, record low. So that's the decision to all the community. How do you want to deal with this? Do you want to acknowledge this, or do you want to ignore it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. I think we're going to discuss also European elections in the working groups, hopefully. No, we're going just for your speech, and then we're going to go work in smaller groups and get back to the plenary.
I actually was talking about my solutions, and now what Marta Lempart said about this very important question to all the politicians, they will candidate for the EU election in the next year. So the situation of the Ukrainian war, it's very important. But I'm not so enthusiastic about, because I was working in Brussels in Cultural Action Europe at the board for 5 years, and I know that we here from Poland are very much stick in this Eastern European dimension. But of course in Brussels there are other things, so I don't think so that the war in Ukraine will be the core question in next year in the election, but I wish it could be, because it is really very important about our security in Europe, very much. And I also join Marta's voice about it is not possible to ignore this. And I hope it won't be ignored. This is very important. But then the second question is, how to do this? How to make this Ukrainian war security important as a core question for the next upcoming elections, upcoming EU elections. And I think this is very, everything actually, it's now in our hands. Because we, the civic society, which we could really demand to finish the war, to make different decisions, to make pressure on politicians, to make different decisions, to finish the war, etc. So it is very important. But to me also, from my point of view, this intersectional feminism, the solution is to unite different civic movements in Europe. And I know that in Brussels, there are many, many advocacy organizations. They working together, collaborate together, and maybe the next year election will be the time that they should work even closer. Not like ecological movements, feminist movements, movements on civic education, movements on cultural education or culture itself, but really for the next year, like one voice of civic society. I hope that will be possible because what has changed, this is the situation of our being secure. I'm not feel secure anymore within the situation in Ukraine. Because every day I wake up and my first thing is, okay, let us see if the war has not started in Poland. Really. I have this thought in my head. So this is very important, just to think about, we are now in extremely different situation than 5 years ago by the former election.
Thank you very much. I think it really links also to what we discussed yesterday about transnational list, and now we're going to approach the European elections, hopefully with a bigger turnout than last European elections. So, okay, next step.
Yes.
Exciting next step.
Yes. So let's now dive into the group discussions. So the essence of having an assembly is that it is participative, and so that you play a role in it, and you're not just here to only listen, which is great, listening and learning, of course, which is what we have done in the first part. Now you're gonna put in application what you've learned and what you already know together. So we will go into group discussions, and if we can have the next slide, we will see the topics for these group discussions. So we will split into 3 groups according to those 3 different topics. So the first group, A, will focus on the role in the elections, the role of transnational movements into supporting feminists and women's rights in the upcoming Polish elections in 2023 and the next EU elections in the spring of 2024. The second group, Group B, will focus on social justice and feminist movements, on how to build convergence amongst social struggles faced by women. So when it's exactly what Litka was explaining earlier about intersectional fights, how do we put together the feminist fight and the social class fight and so on. To create a social justice movement. And the third group, Group C, will focus on the priorities for gender equality and women's rights at national level. So you will be given the opportunity to exchange on how you can support each other to activate feminist legal reform in your local, national context. I'll give you an example on that. For instance, in France, we are now fighting so that the right to abortion is included into the constitution. How can we maybe share, as like a French participant, basically, how can I share the experience I have of the struggle of putting abortion in the constitution, and how can that maybe inspire a feminist who is trying to fight for a wider access to abortion rights in their own country. And then this is how we create a base for transnational rights. So I invite you to divide yourself into those 3 groups, depending on your main topic of interest. I'll invite Elisa, Georg, and Martino to come here, and so they will guide you in this group discussion. We invite you to leave the room for these group discussions so that you're not constrained into this specific space. We have the beautiful winter garden that you've seen outside, very airy and fresh setting, so probably good for the mind. So maybe you can spread yourselves along the stage, and so depending on the groups, you can go towards your facilitator. So Elisa, which is your topic of preference? So if you can come back, and we're gonna share a bit what we discussed about. No.
Okay, so please take your seats. Can't wait to hear what you discussed in your working groups. Yes, please take your seats, please take your seats. Okay, I think we're ready to start.
Yep. Okay, so now is a moment when we can share what was discussed in the little groups. So normally each group has assigned a spokesperson, or some of you, I think, have decided to collectively speak to report back on your discussions. So I invite someone from the group A to join us here on stage and to report back on the discussion you've had on the role in the elections. So who was in Group A or who wants to speak for Group A? Yes.
We have a situation of exploitation. I was also the note taker.
You've been exploited.
Since my notes cannot be read by, not even by myself, I might as well try.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so the main question was basically started up by Marco asking to what extent it could be a danger in a national context, like in the Polish context, to have a kind of intervention from the outside, let's put it like that, not necessarily framing it as a foreign intervention, but an intervention from a political movement or entity that's not clearly defined as part of the national landscape. And so we had a whole discussion about it. I don't think we had a final solution, but there were some productive, I suppose, reflections on this. It could be seen, of course, as counterproductive, and I think it also very much speaks to what is going on in quite a number of countries. Even on the EU level, there's now this leakage on, I think it's a commission discussing an NGO legislation that would ask NGOs to report on foreign funding, right? So this is a sensitive issue. And so transnationality or transnational intervention might be a problem. Some of us confirmed indeed that in Poland it might be very sensitive. As I quote, I don't remember whom, but half of Poland would be still rather moored in Catholic conservative positions. And so to give an example of a progressive position from an outsider might be problematic. For instance, a debate on adoption of children by same-sex couples, things like that, or patchwork families were mentioned. But then again, and I think it was Marco again intervening, it might also be actually the right moment to create a rupture, to create a crack in the existing system. I think he mentioned, for instance, the adoption of abortion law at the end of the 70s in Italy, in a most unlikely moment of high-level terrorist violence, etc. And so we continued to discuss this also by looking at a number of international examples, or let's say examples of elections where transnationality might have worked, like Tsipras in the 2014 elections, who managed to create some kind of more modest transnational coalition. And so there are two positions indeed that came up. So a very cautious one. We need to be aware that two progressive positions might indeed create problems for feminist movements, and a more productive one where it actually might tap into, let's say, sensibilities also amongst Polish people of being part of Europe, being part of a community that is broader than the country itself. Briefly, we talked about so-called zip lists as one, a completely different way, in a way, one dimension that feminist politics might take. We also talked about, I like this suggestion very much, the idea of having a transnational feminist list, and then linking that up with national struggles. And I think you could very easily create a very interesting European landscape. This wasn't discussed, by the way, but European landscape of where you pinpoint out the problems with women's rights in every country, of course, imaginable. So that might be a very interesting potential option, and it was suggested that in Poland there might be female politicians actually trying to go that way. Let me see. Yeah, I think that was roughly it. But there might be members of Group A who have other nuances that I just bluntly stepped over. I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, Paul. Reporting back from the discussion you had in Group A, is there anyone else from that group who wants to add something, maybe, to this sum up? Nope, all good? So you did an amazing job, Paul. Congrats. All right, should we move to Group B then? Virginia, you want to report for that discussion on how to create convergence amongst social justice movements and feminist movements.
So I was the only woman in the group. I felt I have to take the floor. So we tried to approach the issue from starting from the principles. It was easier to kind of identify the key principles that then define the struggles somehow. So the first principle is the principle of not discrimination. The second one is the freedom of autonomous choices and self-determination. And the third one is to I mean, we didn't have a principle, but it could be building societies that are less based on power dynamics or on the idea of gaining more power, so competing for power. So with these foundational elements in mind, first of all, we identified some sort of generic ways on how to create this convergence. The first one is the need for cultural shifts. The second one is creating the conditions for reframing of what we had been brought, and so reframing what we as a society have in mind. And the third is, in general, more democracy, or bringing back democracy to the original meaning, which is not competing for power, but finding the best solution for a society that is inclusive for everyone. So we came out with some ideas on the how, based on these three foundational principles that we think is important to fight for. The first one is related to the economical and cultural context, so is to bridge the gender pay gap and also those elements that force women in a certain role and men in another role, so everything that relates. In one of the instances, the parental the approach to parenting, parental leave as an example. The other how would be forms of affirmative actions. Not all of us agreed, mainly men, but we think affirmative actions and everything that also spot the light on the gap, and we think this should also be coupled to not be too deterministic on other instruments such as data-driven decision-making process, evidence-based. I made an example that I like to make because I think it's interesting. The BBC, for example, has a system to measuring the gender gap in the presences on the television, so the journalists are kind of submitted to seeing the numbers of the gap, and so instead of having a policy of deciding, there is a raising attention element. So coupling affirmative actions with data-driven and evidence-based, or also a human rights-centered approach to artificial intelligence, trying to avoid the bias, so the technological development. Is high enough. And then there is the element of language and cultural, so gendered language, or in general an attention on how we speak about things. So it's linguistic and semantic as well, so the choice of words. I slip to the point of the third point, so societies that are less based on gaining power. Ecology is a good example, where, for example, the idea of thinking that you can control and possess things is one of the elements that determine the problems in the ecosystem and the climate emergency and everything else. So we think that in general, pushing towards more an approach to common goods would help to reduce, again, the power dynamics and to have a sort of a culture of care, and instead of controlling over something, sharing the common goods. And democracy in itself, so everything that aims to reduce the polarization and therefore fostering a culture of competition should be more and more substituted with methodologies that avoid the majority versus minority mechanism. And so, for example, citizen assemblies or mechanisms such as the majority judgment grading, or finding a spectrum on which to take a position and then find the average solution, for example. So democratic innovations that bring back democracy again to the result and not to the competitive approach. We left out the freedom of autonomous choices and self-determination because on one side we think we have a bit of an agreement on this, but also we think that is a bit of a consequence of this reframing and cultural and democratic revolutionary approach that then would naturally bring to more rights. On the other side is also the urgency that we already fight for, so we think there is already a conjunction there. That's it.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you very much. Okay. So I think we could go to group C. I don't know if you have do you have a poster or all of them? Do you want me to hold it? Huh? You want me to hold the poster?
No, but I don't think you need to hold it because it's basically. No. Tutti e quattro, yes, we are all four coming. It was interesting because the question was like gender equality at your national level, and even if we're all born in the same country, we don't live in the same country. So this was somehow one of the first things we started talking, because yes, this is important, this is not important, but then in Germany is in one way, in the Netherlands in another one, and in Italy another one as well. So I think basically we started talking about the need of freedom of choice, I think, as most important points. And then this is when we, maybe I just give it to you, but this is when we start developing this kind of, so instead of saying what can we do on a national level, we start thinking about what is really important for us. And these are the three questions that we came up with. Maybe Claudia, you want to go?
Yes. So because we were in this group of people living in 3 different countries, indeed, we reasoned on the level of what would apply indistinctively to all of them, what would be supporting. And so we articulated that in questions. The first question is, should reproductive rights become constitutional rights, for example? This was discussed today also and mentioned multiple times in relation to France. We agreed with a straightforward yes, and you think that obviously securing certain reproductive rights and constitutions preserves them from being challenged, obviously, with a change of political wings, and also this kind of writes them in stone, which is what we want. We could mention abortion, contraceptive rights, and reproductive health, the right to have access to reproductive health. Then we reasoned, I think, it was very fruitful conversations because we reasoned on feminism, mothers, but then we questioned whether it's really about motherhood when it comes to fundamental rights rather than parenthood. We have, parents can be anything, obviously, and we decided together that equality of sex and gender passes through the neutralization of certain societal functions, and parenthood is just the functions that any of us could cover regardless of gender and sex. So equal parental rights with multiple options. So not, for example, like it is, she gave her own example in Germany, that to become a mom and you have to stay at home an entire year. And that's what the law kind of forces you to do. If you want to go back to work after 6 months, you can't. To the extreme of my own country, the Netherlands, where after 12 weeks from delivery, you are supposed to be back at the office full time. So, I mean, there are lots of extremes here. And we think that having a variety of options is what would kind of serve the purpose and the interests of families, no matter how these families are, single parents, monofamilies, homo families, etc., etc. I leave to Lorenzo to address the third point and to conclude.
Yes, I would like also Francesca to say something. Okay. Third point is about equal representation in public offices. We started to consider equal representation as a criterion regarding politics, and so regarding the composition of electoral list, but not only that, also regarding public offices in general. Should we accept positive discrimination so that in certain circumstances in which, for instance, there is a competition between a man and a woman, we can sometimes promote positive discrimination in the access of public offices? We think this is a useful instrument to promote equal representation. And also regarding that, another tool that helps equal representation are citizen assemblies, and we consider that deliberative democracy can be a tool for acknowledging participants of political issues that maybe because of their background they're not aware of, and thanks to that practice that could be a powerful tool also at national or local level, maybe parenthood policies or women's rights policies could be bring and tackled through this instrument.
Thank you. So I'm going to be the person who wraps it up a little bit. Basically, our line of thought here was how all these issues, the points that we've listed in our chart, are really intertwined, and they influence each other. And this influence can be for the good, but also for the worst. So I'll start from the last point, the one that Lorenzo touched upon, and that is political representation, right? One would say, okay, anyone can stand up for election. If you get voted, you get voted. If you don't get voted, well, sorry, but that's democracy. But it's not that simple, because if in order to stand up for election, you have to have money enough to do so, time enough to do so, a system of support around you that enables you to do that. Well, for how society is built today, we are going to penalize 100% women over men. So when we speak about reproductive rights, what we're really saying is, let's give all the population the same chances of deciding autonomously whether or not they want to stand up for election. And why am I insisting on this point? The reason is that there is no person that knows better about your struggle than yourself. And so representation matters. And so whether you're a woman, a person with disability, a queer person, an older person, a younger person, you have to have representation, you have to have a voice. And when it comes to half of the population, these issues, as you might understand, become urgent. So I'd say that's it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much to all three groups. You did an amazing job. I think you all managed to tackle the issue and the topic of today's session from different perspectives, also different bodies, from the institutional one to the cultural one, sociological one, the cultural, mainly cultural, but yes. So thank you for all three groups. We were wandering around during your working groups, and we saw that it was all heated conversations. I'm really happy to seeing that. A huge thank you also for Tak, for making like this experience even more deep. That's one of the reasons why we're here in Poland today and this weekend, also to give voice to other realities and to really create this space of transnational and sisterhood in some sense, with the limits, of course, but building connections. And also to Marta, which is not connected anymore, I guess. But okay, thank you to Marta. She's always bringing something new to the discussion. So I think what really strikes me today is the fact that we're not only talking about feminism as something that we need to work on with policies or with a political agenda or anything. Is a way of doing things. And it's a way of seeing things and also seeing the connection between not only institutions, but us as citizens, the way we behave with each other, the way we understand relationship, the way we see the world. That's also feminism is I really like to consider feminism as some lenses we put on. And we should never take off. And related to that, I really like quotes, so I'm going to quote again to French sociologist and philosopher Pierre Tartot and Christian Laval. And they once said that building Europe needs feminism because Europe is not possible except based on the basis of cooperation, not competition. And I think Virginia was really clear in this statement. So again, it's a way of seeing things, not only based on competition, but on cooperation. And also with Marta and also with Tak, we saw also the role of women's body in this. And the body, there's a whole area of study on this, so I'm not gonna sum it up for you because that's not my area at all. But it's interesting because, as Marta said, the body was put back at the center of the political strategy. Not only because literally the body take women into the streets, manifesting and protesting and making their voice heard, but also because the body highlighted the risks and the violence that women's bodies suffer every day in every member state, but also beyond the European Union. And it's what we discussed about earlier when we think about the whole situation for women in Iran. We're not only talking about Europe here. That's why transnational is necessary. And we need to try to fight as much as possible, again, the nationalistic philosophy, nationalistic sense of the world and society that requires to stay in this close gap of just identifying ourselves with our nationality. We have so many different identities and we have to refuse to choose one. We can be different things at the same time, and being women or feminist is one of them. And again, then we talked about female representation. We need feminist representation, and we need female representation. And linked to the transnational list, thanks very much for Group A, I think. Yeah, A. We did an amazing job on that. Let's really hope that in the next European elections we can see something like that. Not only from women, but from all political parties, because I think it's absurd, and in 2023 we are considering feminism as an opinion. I mean, it's not an opinion, you get it or you don't get it. I think it's as easy as it gets. Then we can have a discussion about different kinds of feminism, of course, but I really hope that the next European elections can be, at least can share some hope. Always taking into account the fact that we are voting for the European Parliament, which is just one part of this huge and complicated institution called the European Union. So that's my wish, but again, thank you very much for being so active in participating in this assembly, even if it's really late and we all want to go to dinner. Thank you again. I think it was really useful for all of us. And I'll give the floor to Ophélie.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sophia, for your closing remarks. Thank you to all of you for being truly active in the discussion, and you really played your role as full participants in this assembly. So thank you very much for that. It's really appreciative. I just want to pinpoint the fact that, of course, fighting for women's rights and gender equality in Poland is not only about sexual health and reproductive rights, but it's also a big part of it, of course, as SRHR is a big flagship of women's rights in Poland. A few days ago, a Polish feminist activist, Justyna Wietrzyńska, was sentenced in court for having helped some women getting access to abortion. And so we want to show solidarity with her. So Justyna is one of the founding members of a group called the Abortion Dream Team in Poland. One of the very concrete ways that we can help a movement, and this movement in particular, is through donations. So you will see that cup that Elisa is raising here on the table. If you want, you can put any kind of form of financial donations that you want to the Abortion Dream Team. Thank you again for your whole participation in the Assembly. You can, of course, keep in touch with us if you wish through social media, through our newsletter of European Alternatives and of EUmans. So please do that. And thank you again. Goodbye, and feminist solidarity with you all.